Hello, my name is Grant Hempel, and I have chosen recreational cannabis as the public policy issue for my semester project. Throughout this presentation, I will attempt to answer two questions. First, would legalizing recreational cannabis be more beneficial or detrimental for the United States as a whole? And second, should the United States legalize recreational cannabis? I will begin by introducing the policy issue along with providing an evaluative report for the information that I have found in the literature that is related to this policy issue. Next, I will explain the methodology that I used to gather research in order to answer my research questions along with a discussion of the findings. Lastly, I will conclude this presentation with a conclusion that ties all of my information back to and answers my proposed research questions. Cannabis, the scientific name for marijuana, is a plant that has three subspecies: Cannabis indica, Cannabis sativa, and Cannabis ruralis. Marijuana and hemp are both parts of the cannabis plant, but marijuana contains higher level of THC, or delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the psychoactive property that causes people to feel euphoric. Hemp can be cultivated for industrial uses such as rope and fabrics or for low THC non-psychoactive medicinal products. Throughout this presentation, I will be using the terms marijuana and cannabis interchangeably, and recreational and adult use will go hand in hand. The term marijuana legalization refers to the practice of allowing and regulating the production, distribution, sale, and possession of cannabis so that marijuana use within the established rules is no longer a crime. Marijuana legalization comes with different models, ranging from allowing residents to grow their own marijuana to various nonprofit co-ops and for-profit commercialization with retail sales. For decades, the war on drugs has had a negative effect on communities across the United States and has contributed to extraordinarily high incarceration rates around the country. At this time, the federal government appears to favor a stricter marijuana enforcement policy, while an increasing number of states are moving towards the opposite direction by decriminalizing and liberalizing their own marijuana laws. As of 2018, 30 states and the District of Columbia have enacted laws that loosen marijuana restrictions to some degree. 9 of those states and D.C. have legalized the recreational use of marijuana, and 21 states have legalized it for medicinal purposes. The United States appears to have two distinct choices: regress back to the detrimental drug enforcement policies of the past, or take initiative towards a smarter and more effective and fairer criminal justice policy. A number of states have already taken initiative and are leading the way towards a more progressive marijuana policies and have experienced additional improvements in the economy, public health, and public safety. The federal government is now in a position to learn from the various state successes and take initiative towards federally legal marijuana policies. Despite the federal crackdown on marijuana in the late 1900s, recreational marijuana began to trend towards legalization in the early 2000s. It was not until 2012 that Colorado and Washington became the first two states to legalize recreational cannabis. Recreational cannabis stores began to open in Colorado on January 1, 2014, allowing adults 21 and older to purchase cannabis that is taxed and regulated under the state law, and Washington's marijuana retail stores opened on July 8, 2014. The states incorporated a hefty taxation that would then be reallocated back to the states in forms of tax revenue. Colorado was the first to create a regulated recreational marijuana system, and the state started seeing the benefits immediately. Colorado has incorporated 3 different taxes on marijuana sales: a 15% excise tax, a 2.9% tax on both medical and recreational sales, and a 10% special sales tax on retail sales only. The state has a marijuana tax cash fund program from which it distributes dollars. Where are these tax dollars being reallocated? Colorado State Legislature approved the following for 2016-2017. The first $40 million collected annually from the excise tax goes to the Building Excellent Schools Today Fund, which backs construction projects to renovate/replace deteriorating public schools. More than $18 million went to the Department of Public Health and Environment to fund a plethora of programs such as the Marijuana Education Campaign and various substance abuse prevention grants. The Department of Agriculture received $3 million for pesticide control and inspection services, along with 4-H and FAA programs. The Department of Education received $8.4 million for a variety of initiatives, including programs to stop bullying and reduce the number of school dropouts. This is just a short list of beneficiaries from one single state in a one-year span. As time continues to go on and recreational marijuana progresses, it is safe to assume more states will follow Colorado's footsteps and state revenues will continue to increase exponentially. To use A weighted sum model in order to help answer my research questions. Weighted sum models are commonly used as a grading rubric for classes in schools. Classes are broken down into multiple sections for evaluation, with each section carrying a designated weight. For example, a teacher might designate a certain grading weight to a certain section in a class that is the following. Exams count for 65%, assignments for 20%, attendance is 15%, totaling 100% for the total grade. Similar to the classroom example, I have decided to utilize the weighted sum model in an attempt to symbolize the importance of each section and how each section contributes to the sum of the equation. The table that I have provided will help explain how each weighted section has different levels of influence on policy change within the United States. For example, I have identified economic and policy sections as heavily weighted criteria because both sections have an enormous impact on the policy issue through the influence of funding and legislature. I have broken down the issue into 5 separate weighted sections based on importance and can be observed in the table provided. Economic section will carry 35% weight, policy legislation will carry 25% weight, medical will carry 35% or 15% weight, enforcement/incarceration will carry 15% weight, public opinion will carry 10% weight, totaling 100%. I will determine scores for each section based on various trends and data regarding cannabis and its potential impact on society. Current data and trends include national cannabis polling and survey data along with various economic, medical, legislative, enforcement, and incarceration research from various credible academic sources. Upon conclusion, the overall weighted score will be evaluated on a basis of pass or fail. An overall score that is greater than 50% indicates that benefits for the section outweighs the cost and that the United States should legalize recreational cannabis, whereas scores below 50% imply that the costs for the section outweigh the benefits and that the United States should not legalize recreational cannabis. The first section in the weighted sum model is economics. In this section, I conducted background research in order to determine specifically how the legalization of recreational cannabis would affect the United States economy and whether or not the economic benefits outweigh the economic costs. According to revenues from Colorado, marijuana tax, license, and fee revenue collected in 2016 hit $198.5 million. This revenue is derived from total cannabis sales of $1.3 billion, which jumped from $699.2 million in 2014 to $996.2 million in 2015. It is clear that recreational cannabis legalization can boost local and federal economies with thorough regulation and taxation and has been a raw score of 100 out of 100 due to the ability of generating revenue, creating jobs, and benefiting the overall economy. The second section of this model is policy/legislation. In this section, I analyze and compare various state and federal policies in order to determine whether or not recreational cannabis is moving forward or away from legalization. It was not until 2012 that Colorado and Washington became the first 2 states to legalize recreational cannabis, and after legalization, support for legalizing recreational cannabis continued to increase. This resulted in a total of 9 states: Alaska, California, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts, Nevada, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, and the District of Columbia, fully legalizing recreational cannabis by 2018. On top of legalization, 22 states have fully decriminalized certain marijuana possession offenses, and a total of 30 states have legalized medical cannabis. This evidence hints at general progression towards the federalization of recreational cannabis. However, the process is taking states years to change policy/legislation. Due to these factors, I have allocated a raw score of 35 out of 100. The third section of this model is medical. In this section, I determine if cannabis can be used in the medical field and whether or not the positive effects would outweigh the negative effects. The U.S. National Library of Medicine and National Institutes of Health conducted a research study in order to observe the effects of cannabis use in people with ALS, MS, AD, BP, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. The study indicated that cannabis use was found to decrease pain and spasticity in people with MS, decrease tremor, rigidity, and pain in people with PD, and improves the quality of life of ALS patients by improving appetite and decreasing pain/spasticity. Cannabis use was found to be situational with bipolar disorder, and there was no evidence that bipolar patients derive any benefit from cannabis. It is also believed that chronic cannabis use may lead to cognitive impairments and substance dependence. In another study conducted by Project CBD, of 272 patients, 86% had some degree of seizure reduction while using medical cannabis. After evaluating the various costs and benefits, I have allocated a raw score of 65 out of 100 because the potential for using medical cannabis is present. However, there are still documented drawbacks and more research needs to be conducted in order to discover additional medicinal properties. The fourth section of this model is incarceration/enforcement. In this section, I determine how cannabis and its current legal status affects incarceration rates/the federal prison system, and if the cost of incarcerating cannabis users outweighs the benefits. As I stated before, the United States has nearly 25% of the world's incarcerated population, despite comprising less than 5% of the world's total population. The large population of incarcerated people can largely be attributed to the war on drugs, which added harsh criminal penalties for drug offenses, resulting in a rise of incarceration rates. Since 1970, the nation's incarcerated population has increased from around 300,000 to over 2.2 million people today, and 1 out of every 5 incarcerated people are serving time for a drug offense. Today it is estimated that between 40 and 50% of all drug arrests within the United States are for marijuana, and evidence shows the federal government is favoring stricter drug enforcement laws while more states are moving towards liberalizing their individual cannabis laws. Also, according to the American Civil Liberties Union in 2013, the annual fiscal cost of enforcement of cannabis prohibition was over $3.6 billion, and the annual cost savings that would occur from ending cannabis prohibition is to be an estimated $7.7 billion. Due to the massive increase of drug arrests and large percentage of marijuana incarcerations, as well as the annual expense of enforcing cannabis prohibition, I believe that it would be immensely beneficial for the United States to legalize recreational cannabis in order to dramatically decrease our incarceration rates/populations and generate cost savings. I have allocated a raw score of 100 out of 100 for the incarceration/enforcement section. The fifth and final section of this model is public opinion. In this section, I conclude with how the United States public feels about recreational cannabis legalization and which direction public opinion appears to be trending. About 6 in 10 Americans, or 61%, say the use of marijuana should be legalized for the age of 21 and older, which is a slight increase from last year, which was 57%, but nearly double what it was in 2000, which was 31%. Research shows a wide range of generational and partisan differences in views regarding cannabis legalization. The majority of millennials, around 70%, approve, and Gen Xers, around 66%, approve, and baby boomers, with a 56% approval, say the use of cannabis should be legal, and only the silent generation shares a greater opposition, with 58% opposing legalization. It is apparent to me that the greater majority of the U.S. population is in favor of legalizing recreational cannabis, and the support appears to be trending upwards. For the fifth and final section of the model, I have allocated a raw score of 70 out of 100. In conclusion of my findings, I have taken the raw scores from each section and multiplied them individually by their weight percentages and was able to come up with weighted total scores for each section. The results are the following. Economic receives a 0.35, policy/legislation receives a 0.087, medical receives a 0.097, enforcement/incarceration receives a 0.15, and public opinion receives a 0.07. In order to answer my research questions, I have added up all of the individual weighted scores in order to get one total weighted score and ended up with 0.754 out of 1.0, or 75%. Referring back to my methodology and research questions, the total weighted score is evaluated on a pass-fail basis. An overall score greater than 500, or 50%, indicates that benefits for recreational cannabis outweigh the costs and that the United States should legalize recreational cannabis. Whereas the score below 50% would imply that the costs for legalizing recreational cannabis outweigh the benefits. In conclusion of my analysis, I have determined that the total weighted score is above 500 or 50% and that the United States should legalize recreational cannabis. Thank you for taking the time to review my presentation, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.